Salutations, students. Welcome to the second half of the How to Draw Shadow class. As you'll remember, in our last class, we discussed drawing Shadow the Hedgehog on paper. Today, I'm going to demonstrate my techniques for coloring him using the Paint Tool Sai. As in any artwork that I do with Sai, I upload the original image and use that as a template to do the line work. I did not record the line working process, however, because I felt it was unnecessary to show this since we already discussed how to sketch shadow in the last video. But if you would like to see my line working techniques anyway, you may refer to the speed paint I did earlier on. A link shall be provided in the description of this video. So without further ado, let us begin. Here, of course, is the line work. I'd like to point out, if I may, after looking at an official render of Shadow, I decided to copy the way the shoes are done. Beforehand, I had always followed the Sonic X style because it was simpler. Either style is fine though. To fill in the area to be colored, I go to the line work layer, use the selection tool to select that space, then use the bucket tool on a separate layer. It'll fill in just that spot. In order to get the correct colors, I'm going to use this picture of Shadow to compare with. The selection tool doesn't always cover every pixel, especially if there are sharp corners. These have to be filled in manually. Now that I've filled in the colors, I'm going to start shading and highlighting. One very important thing to remember is this option, the Preserve Opacity option. This will prevent you from coloring outside of what colors are already on that layer. This way you don't have to worry about erasing if you go outside the lines. The two main tools I use are the airbrush and the blur tool. As I said in my speed paint, the blur tool is like using pastels. It comes very much in handy for shading and highlighting. The biggest thing you need to think about while doing these two things is where is the light coming from? For this picture, I'm placing the light source as being in the top right-hand corner of the page. Notice that I'm saving every one of the colors that I use. This is optional, but it'll save you a lot of color mixing time. It's easy to highlight on the edge of the selection space, as I'll call it, but any open surfaces that are being hit by the light, like Shadow's forehead, need to be gently lightened as well. So I airbrush it, and then blur it all in. Now for the eyes. My rule of thumb is to take a light gray, use the airbrush tool to apply it, and then take gradually darker grays to better define the edges of the eye with smaller airbrushing. With any shading, actually, that's the pattern you'll follow. Do large shading with a slightly darker color than the base, then use gradually darker colors, blending each one in as needed. Then a lot of times I'll finish it off by using the brightness contrast slider. For the fur tufts on Shadow's chest fur, I airbrush the shadows in darkly, blend it a lot with the blur tool, and then go over it with the base color, in this case white. After that, I color in the shadows again, and then blur it just a little bit. Oh boy. As if drawing Shadow wasn't hard enough, the next most daunting thing to drawing Shadow's shoes is coloring the rings around his wrists and ankles. They're like gold and are rounded. I've tried for a long time to find a technique for drawing realistic, shiny-looking inhibitor rings. This time I'm going to use this render of Shadow to draw inspiration from. There are a few things I want to point out about this render before we get back to the painting. You'll notice that, firstly, the rings have a thin line of highlight facing to where the light source is coming from. Secondly, all of them have a rather strict shading. It doesn't blend in smoothly, it's very defined. Having taken that into account, I improvised a method while in production of this very picture, and it turned out rather well. I shall teach it to you. First, take a very light form of your base color, or white. Use an airbrush that is sized just a little bigger than the lines of line work, and go around the edges of the ring that are facing the light source. Next, I created another layer on top of the rings layer. I choose an orangey amber color and use the paintbrush tool to color in the strict shading. I then set this layer to 66% opacity. That makes it slightly see-through. Then, I use a very tiny blur to soften the edge of the shading, like so. After that, on the rings layer, I use that same amber color to do just a little bit of airbrushing behind the strict shadow. I noticed also from the official render that the rings had a slightly lighter color towards the bottom half of the ring's shadow. So I then take a dark orange and airbrush that on the shading layer. To finish it off, I just add a little more highlight. That is how I now do Shadow's rings. I'm always open to new ways of doing paintings, so if you'd like to share your own techniques, please feel free to. here come the shoes. Notice that I put the outer part of the red metal and the inner part next to the vents on separate layers. This will make coloring them much easier. I don't really have a specific way of doing this part of Shadow's footwear, but I can say that due to the material, the darks and lights will be sharper. Now, to finish off this painting, I'll now do the irises. The colored part of the eye, or iris, is what really brings life into the character's face. In which case, it's crucial to put in as much detail as possible. My technique for irises is as follows. I take a very dark version of the base color and outline the colored area. I do the same around the pupil too. Then I take a different color. Like for red eyes, I'd use orange or yellow. For blue eyes, I'd use purple or green. I take that almost white color and go around the bottom half of the iris, leaving just a little bit of base between the shadow and this highlight. Something else I do to make the eyes more lifelike, I put a layer on top of the line work. On this layer, I airbrush a little white over the eye. Don't completely cover the iris, but do it just enough to make the eye shiny looking. Back to the iris layer. I take the light color and make gradually smaller dots or lines on top of the highlight, and then redo the shading. To avoid having to repeat all of that, I copy that layer and move the colored part over to the other eye. After making sure everything has been colored well, the picture is done and ready to have a background. I'll just let you observe as I improvise this one. And with that, the painting is fully complete. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you are able to learn something that will assist you in improving your own artwork. I must admit that I myself am no master at painting or drawing, but I continue to learn through observation of greater artists on DeviantArt and other sites. So I hope you are able to do the same today. Our class for next month shall be on the 1st of February on Twitter.com. Class dismissed.